Last chance for the Steelers. Bradshaw trying to get away. And his pass is broken up by Tatum. Tipped off. Franco Harris has it. And he's over. Franco Harris.
It's December 23rd, 1972, and Franco Harris just made one of the most iconic plays in NFL history, the Immaculate Reception. Being in the right place at the right time, Harris somehow snagged the ricocheted football mere moments before it hit the ground, running down the sideline for a game-winning touchdown and sending the Pittsburgh Steelers to the AFC Championship game. But this was more than just a wacky play. It changed the landscape of the entire NFL. This play was franchise-altering for the Steelers, kickstarting a dynasty in the 1970s, a stretch that saw them put together some of the finest football teams ever assembled and win 4 Super Bowls in a 6-year span. That run gave birth to the Steeler Way, which served as the blueprint for years on how to build a Super Bowl winning team. And today, we're going to talk about why we will never see anything like it ever again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the evolution of the Super Bowl blueprint. Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Pigskin. The doctor is in, and today I'm going to be attempting to answer the question that every NFL GM faces. How do you build a Super Bowl winning team? I've spent most of my summer trying to get to the bottom of this, and what I found is pretty interesting. Now obviously, there's not a literal blueprint that teams need to follow if they want to win a Super Bowl, but the NFL is a copycat league, and there's been one model that teams have been trying to follow more often than any other, and that's the Steeler Way. People have often directly or indirectly cited the Steeler Way as the right way to build a team. You've heard it before. Draft a bunch of young players, keep them together for years, develop them, and then when they all hit their prime, then you're finally ready for a Super Bowl run. But the reality is that that line of thinking, that model that teams have been trying to follow for years, is outdated. We're in the middle of a massive cultural shift in the NFL right now, and that's what we're going to talk about today. In this video, I'm going to answer the question of how to build a Super Bowl winning team in today's modern NFL. We're going to take a look at the Steeler Way, what it is and why it's outdated, and also take a look at how some of the recent Super Bowl winners have built their team. If you want to win a Super Bowl, then you came to the right place. Alright, now with that in mind, let's get started.
Alright, we got some breaking news here on NFL Network. It's not a quarterback trade, but can I interest you in a Tyreek Hill trade? Yeah, that's right. Don't adjust your television. Tyreek Hill has been traded from Kansas City to Miami.
When your favorite team takes the field in Week 1, take a good look at the players on the roster and cherish that moment. Because it's likely that by 2025, almost 2/3 of those players will be gone. That's not an exaggeration, that's a literal fact. It is harder than ever for teams to keep their own players, and that's made the Steeler Way almost impossible to replicate. One of the biggest pillars of the Steeler Way was longevity. You don't just want to build a good team, you want to build a good team that will last. There's a reason the Steelers were the blueprint for so long. Pittsburgh's success in the 70s came on the back of an incredible 22-player core. These 22 players appeared on all 4 Super Bowl winning teams, a 6-year stretch from 1974 to 1979. This wasn't just a group of solid players either. 10 of them would go on to make the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The fact that the Steelers were able to assemble a group of talent like this is already pretty impressive. But what really stands out is how long they were able to keep this group together. All 22 of these players played at least 8 seasons with the Steelers, and only 4 of them ever played a game for a team other than Pittsburgh. That's right, Franco Harris was a Seahawk. Go ahead and store that nugget away for Immaculate Grid purposes. The point I'm making here is that the 70s Steelers did what every NFL GM dreams of, building up a core of young, homegrown players and keeping them together for years, creating a dynasty. Winning 4 Super Bowls in 6 years is already really impressive, but on top of that, they only missed the playoffs twice from 1972 to 1984. Their Super Bowl window was constantly wide open because they had around a decade's worth of Hall of Fame level play all over the field. It's no wonder that all the NFL tried to replicate their success, but in today's league, Just how realistic is that? Well, the truth is that it's not, at least to the extent of those 70s Steelers. Building a core of players is already hard enough, but keeping them together for that long, well, that's practically impossible. Let's take a look at roster turnover over the past 10 years. I want to give a shout out to Jason Fitzgerald of overthecap.com. He's done a lot of excellent research on this topic that I poured through in making this video. Here's what I found. Last season, on average, teams were able to keep a little under 64% of their players from the previous season. That might sound pretty high, but think about it for a sec. That means a little over 1/3 of the team is not there the next season. On a 53-man roster, that's around 19 players going out the door every year. Now, year-by-year turnover is one thing, but it's substantially harder to keep players for multiple years. Since 2013, the average NFL team keeps around only 35% of their players in a 2-year span. 35%! These aren't just bench players either. Starting players are changing teams at an exceptionally high rate. Think about your favorite team's starting lineup from 2 years ago and compare it to now. Me, I'm a Vikings fan, so we'll use the Vikings as an example. This is the Vikings starting lineup from their 2021 season opener against the Cincinnati Bengals. Just 2 years later, 11 of those players are no longer on the team. That's 50% of their starters gone in just 2 years. You might be thinking, well, the Vikings are an anomaly. 2021 was the last season before they switched GMs and head coaches. Of course they had high turnover. But what if I told you that the Vikings keeping 50% of their starters in a 2-year stretch is actually higher than the league average? I went through every team's starting lineup from the 2021 season and checked to see if they were still on the roster today. And what I found is that teams keep on average between only 9 and 10 starters over a 2-season period, around 43%. Even the most successful teams struggle to keep a big core of players together. Let's take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are today's model of success. In the 5-season stretch of 2018 to 2022, they've won 2 Super Bowls and made the AFC Championship game every single season. They've built through the draft too. Surely they must have done a great job at keeping their core together. Well, I want you to take a guess as to how many players have been on all 5 of those teams. The answer is only 6. Let's compare that to the 70 Steelers. In their 6-year stretch, the Steelers were able to keep over 3 times as many players as the Chiefs in a 5-year stretch. The Steelers kept more players that would make the Hall of Fame than the Chiefs could keep at all. The Chiefs aren't built on a massive core of players that they've been able to keep for years. It's really just the 3 superstars, Mahomes, Jones, and Kelsey, and a constant rotation of players around them. Now that's not for a lack of trying. The Chiefs have had other great players besides those 3. Tyreek Hill, Tyrann Mathieu, Charvarius Ward, Juan Thornhill, just a few examples, but they just haven't been able to keep them. Now, in spite of that, they've been able to sustain their success for a while now, and we'll get into why in a little bit, but for now, just remember this. The Kansas City Chiefs, today's shining model of excellence, one that prides themselves on drafting and developing, has been able to keep only 6 players in a 5-year stretch. The idea of having a massive core of players is great in theory, but it's just not that practical. A big reason why the Steeler way is outdated is because it's practically impossible to keep that many players together for that long of a time. But why is that? Why is roster turnover so high? Why can't teams keep their own players? Well, it's because they need to.
There are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us. It's an unfair game.
In the NFL, there are no rich teams or poor teams. It is a fair game, and that's because of the salary cap. The salary cap puts a limit on how much teams can spend on players' salaries. It's the same for everyone, and don't you dare go over. Because of this, every team in the NFL has to mind the cap. They can't just go around spending willy-nilly, they've got to be smart with their money. Teams literally can't afford to pay everyone, and that's an easy explanation for why roster turnover is so high. But did you know it wasn't always that way? The salary cap has only been around since the 90s. That's right, the salary cap is less than 30 years old, and it's drastically changed how teams are built. Of course the 70 Steelers were able to keep 22 players in a 6-year stretch. They could afford all of them. There was no salary cap back then. Keeping that core together today would be impossible. Imagine if the Steelers had to pay Terry Bradshaw like a franchise QB, Pay Joe Green like Aaron Donald, Mel Blount like Jalen Ramsey. Oh, and you gotta pay Lynn Swann top wide receiver money. Oh, and you have to answer the question if not only one, but two running backs are worth the money in Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier. And on top of all that, keep all their other pieces together and get a little better so no one else catches up to them. Once again, the Steeler way blueprint comes up short in today's game. Now, good players aren't just hard to find, they're costly to keep. A salary cap means that every NFL team has to spend their money as efficiently as possible. Around the NFL, some general managers have turned to a tactic called Moneyball. So what exactly is Moneyball? Moneyball is a term describing baseball operations in which a team endeavors to analyze the market for baseball players and buy what is undervalued and sell what is overvalued. Unlike a common misconception, it is not about OBP, but whatever is undervalued at the time. I will give $5 to anyone that can guess where that definition came from. Believe it or not, it was actually Urban Dictionary. I liked it a lot better than the first one that came up. Yeah, Moneyball came from baseball, but it's applicable to football too. It's how teams have been navigating the salary cap. You buy what's undervalued and you sell what's overvalued. Does that sound familiar? There has been a ton of discussion this offseason over how little running backs have been getting paid, and fair or not, that's Moneyball at work. That's teams selling what they find to be overvalued in running backs. Now that begs the question, what's undervalued? What are teams buying right now? Well, the answer to that would be rookie contracts. It's well known that rookie contracts are substantially cheaper than most contract extensions, and that's because of the rookie wage scale. The rookie wage scale was put in place in 2011, which essentially assigns an amount of money to each draft position. The first overall pick in the draft gets a set amount of money, and with each descending pick, the amount of money gradually decreases. The contracts are 4 years long, with first-round picks getting a fifth-year team option. As a result, rookie contracts have become the biggest loophole in the NFL. Let's take a look at the team that won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, the Los Angeles Rams. Think about how they were built. The majority of this team's top contributors were acquired through trades or free agency. They made big move after big move, and a lot of people would question, how the heck can they afford all these players? Well, it's because the Rams had a lot of players on rookie contracts and took advantage. In 2021, 8 of the Rams starters were on rookie contracts. Those 8 players combined to account for only 4.5% of the Rams' cap space. That's less than 5% of their money on over a third of their starting lineup. Those bargains gave them the financial flexibility to make moves like trading for Von Miller or signing Odell Beckham Jr. While their philosophy of F them picks got all the headlines, the only reason the Rams were able to make all those big moves is because they played Moneyball. Another fascinating example is the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember when they traded Tyreek Hill? It was a shocking move at the time, a Super Bowl contender dealing an all-pro level receiver in the prime of his career. They didn't want to trade Tyreek, but with the receiver entering the final year of his contract and wanting a raise, they decided that money would be better spent elsewhere. They used a classic Moneyball tactic, replacing Tyreek Hill in the aggregate. The top 4 wide receivers on the Chiefs' Super Bowl depth chart were all acquired after the Tyreek trade. Combined, those 4 receivers cost the Chiefs almost $11 million in cap space, but had they kept Tyreek Hill instead, he alone would have been almost $10 million more expensive. Now that is the power of rookie contracts right there. At the bare minimum, it gives teams wiggle room to either add more top talent or retain talent that they already have, which we established earlier is really hard today. But sometimes, a perfect storm brews and everything comes together. And those players on rookie contracts, well, they're pretty darn good in their own right.
But Pittsburgh's love affair encompasses all 40 men on the team, and though it's the youngsters like Harris, Ham, Terry Bradshaw, and Frank Lewis that have captured the headlines, as the team prepared for its most important game of the year against the Browns, the game, and in a real sense the season, was dedicated to the Steeler old-timers, those predictable losers who never quit believing this day would come.
Let's go back to December 23rd, 1972, the Immaculate Reception game. This was the Steelers' first playoff win since 1947, and in fact, it was their first playoff berth since 1947. While they didn't go on to win the Super Bowl that season, they actually lost in the following round to the undefeated Dolphins. It sent a message across the league. They'd be back. their best was yet to come. Terry Bradshaw was 24, Franco Harris was 22, Joe Green was 26, Jack Ham was 26, Mel Blount was 24. Their future was looking bright. This team was so young that of their 22 starters on that day, only 4 of them were 30 or older. For years, when teams would try and assemble young talent, this is what they were trying to emulate. This is the Steeler way at its best. It's one thing if you have a bunch of young players, but when they're good, that's perfect, right? If they're this good now, just think of how good they can be with a few more years of experience under their belt. Give them time to develop and grow, and they'll be back better than ever. While that line of thinking proved to be true for the Steelers, they did get better. It's not that simple in today's NFL. Today, age is just a number. Young players are not only bargains compared to veterans, they're just as good now. Think about all the elite seasons we've seen from rookie players over the past couple of years. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater. I could go on. Being young and lacking NFL experience aren't nearly the hindrances that they used to be. The NFL is younger than it's ever been. Let's take a look at snap-weighted age. Snap-weighted age, or SWA for short, is a stat invented by Football Outsiders that measures how old or young a team is. Rather than just calculating the average age of a 53-man roster, SWA gives a more accurate reflection on how young or old a team is because it prioritizes the ages of the players that actually see the field. Last season, the SWA of the entire NFL was 26.4. That's almost an entire year younger than when Football Outsiders started tracking that stat in 2006. What SWA also shows us is that there's very little correlation between a team's age and their success. The SWAs of the teams in the Super Bowl over the past 5 seasons are all over the place. Last season, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl with an SWA of 25.4, which, believe it or not, was second youngest in the NFL. They defeated the Philadelphia Eagles, whose SWA of 26.6 was 15th. Now, just 5 years prior, the New England Patriots won the Super Bowl with an SWA of 27.9, which was the oldest in the NFL, defeating the Los Angeles Rams and their 22nd ranked SWA of 26.6. The other Super Bowls in that time period saw old teams, young teams, and teams right down the middle. All that matters is that your team is good enough to win, and it's clear that younger players are just as capable as older players. Now, back in the day, teams used to take their time with their rookies. They'd make them sit and wait and learn. Think of the 70s Steelers, for example. How about Lynn Swann? He was a Hall of Fame wide receiver, numerous Pro Bowls, first-round pick. But his rookie season, he barely played. He had 11 catches and 2 starts. You don't really see that today. The Bengals completed the fastest rebuild ever when their group of really talented young players took them on a deep playoff run a few years ago, and then it only took the Jaguars 1 season to beat the record. The defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs won it all as the second youngest team in the league, despite the narrative that they were in a rebuilding year. It wasn't just Mahomes carrying them either. They had huge contributions from rookies George Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, and Isaiah Pacheco. But perhaps the most interesting case is the 2020 Buccaneers. Make no mistake, outside of Brady, Gronk, and Antonio Brown, this team was young. That season, 10 of their starters were aged 25 or younger. A lot of the Buccaneers' best players that season were young. Antoine Winfield Jr. and Tristan Wirfs were rookies, Devin White and Sean Murphy-Bunting were in their second year, while Chris Godwin, Alex Kappa, and Carlton Davis were all 25 or younger. The Buccaneers had a young team, but they didn't see themselves as a few years away. They saw themselves as a few players away. Brady and friends were just the missing piece they needed. And let's not forget, it was easy for the Bucs to add Brady, Gronk, Fournette, AB, and the like because of all those rookie contracts on the books. Here's an analogy that I'll offer to really drive the point home. If you've ever played Madden, and specifically franchise mode, you might have found yourself in a predicament like this. You're in your first, maybe second season as GM, trying to build up your team, but you keep winning. And that kind of bugs you. You don't want to win yet. It's too early. That would be unrealistic. Well, that's the old Steeler way line of thinking. That's not how it really works in today's NFL. This might sound just a little harsh, but being young isn't really a valid excuse for teams coming up short anymore. Being young didn't stop the Buccaneers from being successful. Same goes for the Bengals and even the 2022 Chiefs. There isn't a magical waiting period to become a good team, you just kinda have to be good when you're good. And when you recognize that the team you've built won't last forever, that only raises the stakes. You see, when you're good, you have to.
So in honor of the shirt, F them picks, we'll use them to go win more Super Bowls.
So what does this all mean? Now that we've debunked the Steeler way as the Super Bowl blueprint, what have successful teams been doing? Teams like the Chiefs, the Rams, and the Buccaneers? Well, they've all been seizing the day. That's right. In today's NFL, the Steeler way is to seize the day. When I was doing research for this video, I came across an article by Bob Strum of The Athletic. It's titled Championship Windows and How Dynasties Are Beyond Difficult, and it was written leading up to the Bengals-Rams Super Bowl back in 2021. There's a quote in there that I really like, and I think it sums up this line of thinking really, really well. Strum says, "We want everything to make sense in a nice, easy Chicago Bulls narrative where young Michael Jordan could not make the playoffs, but then they did and lost. But then they won around and then lost, and climbed this long methodical staircase before finally winning a title in 1991 at age of 27. That makes for a great book, but sometimes you have Burrow showing up in his first playoff and Stafford needing to leave his longtime home, and presto. Neither makes a ton of sense if we try and explain it with past precedents as our guide. There may not always be a template. The template has changed. No longer is the slow, methodical approach of the Steeler way rewarded with championships. Now, it's the most aggressive, savvy teams that get the Lombardis. Think about the last 3 teams that have won the Super Bowl. The Buccaneers quickly built a young core of talented players, and instead of waiting around a few years for them to get better, they went all in and bet on themselves being ready for a Super Bowl now. And it worked! They won a Super Bowl before it all fell apart. The Rams went all in on a short window, stacking the deck with as many star players as they could, sacrificing any future draft capital. They played Moneyball to cut corners around the salary cap and built a super team. And it worked! They got a Super Bowl before it all fell apart. Even the Kansas City Chiefs have seized the day. Trading Tyreek Hill wasn't a surrender, it was a win-now move. They played Moneyball to replace him in the aggregate, loaded up treating the draft like free agency to get talented players, and it worked! They got a Super Bowl. Time will tell when it falls apart. None of these teams followed the Steeler way. They didn't take their time following a multiple-year timeline, slowly and methodically building. They saw a window of opportunity and acted on it. After I found the new blueprint that teams have been following to win a Super Bowl, I started to wonder just how widespread of a line of thinking is this? Are there any other teams that are following this model right now? Well, I would argue that there are a few teams, but one in particular that's really caught my eye is the New York Jets. It wasn't that long ago that the New York Jets were an absolute mess. In 2020, they finished with a 2-14 record, second worst in the NFL. They followed that up by selecting Zach Wilson with the second overall pick in the 21 draft. Wilson played poorly his rookie season, and the Jets won only 4 games in 2021. Things looked bleak, and the Jets looked years away from even competence, let alone being a Super Bowl contender. And yet, just 2 years later, the Jets now have the 7th highest odds to win the Super Bowl. So, how did they do it? The Jets have seized the day. Last season, they improved to 7 wins on the back of a strong core of young players. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Quinnen Williams, DJ Reed, Elijah Vera Tucker. All these players are 26 and under and really, really good. Not just good for their age, good. They're also cheap. Those 6 players will account for only 14.5% of the Jets' cap space in 2023. Even 10, 15, let alone 50 years ago, I don't think the Jets would have taken this approach. If you want to compare them to the 70s Steelers, the 2022 Jets were probably a lot more comparable to the 1971 Steelers, a year before the Immaculate Reception. They would have still been seen as a few years away and not quite ready to win yet. But the Jets aren't following the Steeler way. They're seizing the day, going all in right now. They recognize that this collection of young players that they have going into the season is likely going to be as good as it gets. Guys like Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson might get a little better over the next few years, but they're also going to get substantially more expensive. Heck, the first domino already fell. They just signed Quinnen Williams to a massive extension, which will increase his cap number from $6.5 million in 2023 to over $20 million in 2024. They didn't see their team as too young, one that needs more time and experience. They saw their team as a piece away from being elite. So they sent 4 draft picks to the Packers for Aaron Rodgers. They needed a quarterback, so they went out and got a quarterback. They're prioritizing their current success over any future success, despite having a really young team. Yeah, it's a gamble, but if it was a foolproof plan, then everyone would be doing it. But ask the Rams if trading all those first-round picks was worth it. Ask the Chiefs if trading Tyreek Hill was worth it. And ask the Buccaneers if going all in for Brady was worth it. The answer is yes, because it worked for them. The last 3 Super Bowl winning teams have been built by seizing the day, and other teams around the league have taken notice. The purpose of this video isn't to discredit the Steeler way or what the 70s Steelers did. I think it's incredible, and it deserves to be immortalized forever. It's a part of football history. But a lot has changed since Franco Harris caught that bouncing ball 50 years ago. Rosters turn over at a higher rate than ever before, the salary cap makes teams be smart with their money, young players are better than ever before. It's a very, very different league. There are so many variables at play in an NFL season, and because of that, the window of opportunity to win a Super Bowl is smaller than ever before. The cold, objective fact is that every season, only one team wins the Super Bowl. And for the other 31, well, it's back to the drawing board. I hope you have a good blueprint. Alright, that's all I've got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a lot of fun sharing my thoughts on this, and I'm curious to see what you guys think too. Do you think the Steeler way is outdated, or do you think it still has relevance in today's game? Let me know down in the comments below. I also want to give a shout out to all my new subscribers from my last video. I was overwhelmed with all the love that I got from it. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And for anyone new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and go check out and see what else I've got going on. Alright, that's it for me today. The doctor is out.